yourself. We begin by lighting a candle for all our concerns for the larger world, our wish for peace and justice, our hopes for the children who will inherit this planet. May this candle represent all these wishes and calls to action that are more than we can articulate in this space. And now, let us share the personal joys and sorrows in our lives. We have a joy from Mary Botts. She says, "Thank you to those marching and protesting with this corrupt administration. This is a nationwide protest." On a personal note, I have a joy to share that I'm going to have surgery on my right hand on Friday to alleviate my arthritis pain, so I'm overjoyed. We now light one more candle for these joys and sorrows and concerns that remain unexpressed, but are still held close to our hearts. And now please join me in saying the affirmation. We join you in celebrating your joys. May you feel our love and compassion for your sorrows and concerns. For all that is spoken and unspoken, may the caring of our beloved community sustain us all. Let us move into the spirit of meditation, reflection, and prayer. You may close your eyes, take a deep breath, whatever helps you find your center. Know you are not alone and discover the way our voices rise, by Reverend Gretchen Haley. For this one moment, know only that you are loved, that you are safe and whole and loved. Know that you belong here, here among us, here upon this earth, in your body. However tired or broken your heart may be, whatever fear, disappointment, anger you carry, for this hour, know you are not alone. Feel the presence of others surrounding you, breathing beside you and with you, discovering together the way our voices rise and fall together in harmony in hope. Claim here a resilient freedom, the choice for love, for light, to live with joy and gratitude and praise as a form of resistance. In 1920, Harriet E. Ware of Milton, Massachusetts, bequeathed $5,000 to the American Unitarian Association, the AUA, for its unrestricted use. The Ware Lectureship was developed in honor of 3 generations of the distinguished Ware family. The first Ware Lecture was given in 1922 and has been given almost every year since. First at the former May meetings of the AUA, and starting in 1961 at the General Assembly. The Unitarian Universalist Association president, in consultation with the General Assembly Planning Committee, invites a distinguished guest each year to address the General Assembly as the Ware Lecturer. In 1996, they invited Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., preacher, reformer, citizen, man of peace, and lover of justice, declaring that in any history, he will be appraised as one of the truly great men of the century. 2 years later, he was assassinated in Memphis.
Following is a heavily condensed version of the 1966 Ware Lecture, Don't Sleep Through the Revolution, by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., delivered by Dr. King at the UUA General Assembly in Hollywood, Florida, May 18, 1966. I hope I can do it justice. There are those wonderful moments in life when you speak before a group that is so near and dear to you that you don't feel like you have to engage in the art of persuasion. You know that you are amongst friends. I can assure you that I feel that way tonight. My own experience with Unitarian Universalism began when I was a student at Boston University. I can remember on several occasions visiting Arlington Street Church And I can remember beyond that, in the early years of my ministry and in the early years of the bus boycotts in Montgomery, 3 of your ministers visited and encouraged me during that very trying time. I refer to David Cole, Alfred Hawkins, and my dear friend Homer Jack. I also want to acknowledge your massive participation in Alabama during 1965. Now, this support expressed itself both before and after the death of our colleague, James Reeb. We grieved at the death of Mr. Reeb, and I was glad to participate in his memorial service. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which I have the honor of serving as president, participates with the Americans Friends Service Committee and the UUA in the James Reeb's Memorial Fund. So far, we have substantially helped the family of Jimmy Lee Jackson and other victims of racial violence. In Chicago, we are also engaged in a campaign to end the slums conditions and those that create those conditions. We are happy to welcome the cooperation of UUs in that movement. So you can see that in many ways, and for a long time now, we have worked together in a very meaningful way. I want to express my personal appreciation for your support, and let me say that it has been of inestimable value in the continuance of our humble efforts. I'm sure that each of you has read the story from the pen of Washington Irving entitled Rip Van Winkle. One thing that we usually remember is that Rip slept for 20 years. But there is another point in that story which is almost completely overlooked. It is the sign on the inn of the little town from which Rip went up into the mountains for his long sleep. When he went up, the sign had a picture of King George III. When he came down, the sign had a picture of George Washington. When Rip Van Winkle looked at the picture of George Washington, he didn't know who he was. This incident reveals to us that the most striking thing about this story is not merely that he slept 20 years, but that he slept through a revolution. While he was peacefully snoring up in the mountains, a revolution was taking place in the world that would alter the face of human history. Yet Rip knew nothing about it. One of the great misfortunes of history is that all too many individuals and institutions find themselves in a great period of change and yet fail to achieve the new attitudes and outlooks that the new situation demands. There is nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution, and there can be no gainsaying of the fact that a social revolution is taking place today. We see it in other nations in the demise of colonialism. We see it in our struggle against racial segregation and discrimination, and as we notice this struggle, we are aware that a social revolution is taking place in our midst. Victor Hugo once said that there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. The idea whose time has come today is the idea of freedom and human dignity. And so all over the world, we see something of a freedom explosion. And this reveals to us that we are in the midst of revolutionary times. An older order is passing away, and a new order is coming into being. The great question is, what do we do when we find ourselves in such a period? Certainly, the church has a great responsibility because when the church is true to its nature, it stands as a moral guardian of the community and of society. It has always been the role of the church to broaden horizons, to challenge the status quo, and to question and break mores if necessary. I would like to suggest some of the things that the church must continually do to remain awake through this revolution. First, we are challenged to instill within our congregations a world perspective. The world in which we live is one. We are challenged to make it one in terms of brotherhood. Modern man has been able to dwarf distance and place time in chains, and our jet planes have compressed into minutes distances that once took weeks, even months. Through our scientific genius, we have made of this world a neighborhood. And now, through our moral and ethical commitment, we must make it a brotherhood. We must live together as brothers, or we will perish together as fools. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. Some years ago, Mrs. King and I journeyed to that great country of India. It was a marvelous experience to meet and talk with the great leaders and thousands of people all over the cities and villages of that vast country. These experiences will remain dear to me as long as the cords of memory exist. But my friends, I must say to you that there were depressing moments. How can one avoid being depressed when he sees millions of people going to bed hungry? How can one avoid being depressed when he sees thousands sleeping on the sidewalks? They have no houses to go in or beds to sleep in. Most of these people have never seen a doctor or a dentist. As I noticed these conditions, something within me cried out, can we in the U.S. stand idly by? And an answer came to me, oh no, because our destiny is tied up with the destiny of India and of every other nation. I started thinking about the millions of dollars we spend each day to store surplus food, and I said to myself, I know where we can store that food free of charge. In the wrinkled stomachs of millions of God's children in Asia, Africa, South America, and in our own nation who go to bed hungry. It may be that we spend too much of our national budget establishing military bases around the world, and too little on bases of genuine concern and understanding. All I'm saying is this, all life is interrelated. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. John Donne caught it years ago and placed it in graphic terms. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a piece of the main. He goes on to say, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Therefore, send not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. This realization is absolutely necessary if we are to remain awake in this revolution. Secondly, it is necessary for the church to reaffirm over and over again the essential immorality of racial segregation. Any church which affirms the morality of segregation is sleeping through the revolution. We must make it clear that segregation is morally wrong and sinful. It is not only sociologically untenable or politically unsound or merely economically unwise, it is morally wrong and sinful. There is another thing that the church must do to remain awake. I think it is necessary to refute the idea that there are superior and inferior races. We must get rid of that notion once and for all. It is out of this notion that the doctrine of white supremacy came into being, and the church must take a stand through religious education and channels to direct the popular mind at this point. For there are some people who still believe this strange doctrine. It's a strange notion that has made for a great deal of strife and suffering. The academic world and the disciplines of science have refuted this idea. Anthropologists like Ruth Benedict, Margaret Mead, and Herskovits have made it clear that they find no evidence for the idea of superior and inferior races. There may be superior and inferior individuals in every race, but no superior or inferior races. Today's arguments are generally placed on more subtle cultural grounds. For instance, the Negro is not culturally ready for integration. If you integrate the schools and other areas of life, this will put the race back a generation. And another, the Negro is criminal. You see, he has the highest crime rate in any city. So the arguments go on. Those who use these arguments never say that if there are lagging standards in the Negro community, and there certainly are, they lag because of segregation and discrimination. They never go on to say that the criminal responses are environmental and not racial. Poverty, ignorance, economic deprivation, social isolation breed crime in any racial group. It is a tortuous logic to use the tragic results of segregation as an argument for the continuation of it. The next thing that the church must do to remain awake through this revolution is to move out into the arena of social action. It is not enough for the church to work in ideology and to clear up misguided ideas. To remain awake through this social revolution, the church must engage in strong action programs to get rid of the last vestiges of segregation and discrimination. It is necessary to get rid of one or two myths if we're really going to engage in this kind of action program. One is the notion that legislation is not effective in bringing about the changes that we need. This argument says that you've got to change the heart to solve the problem, that you can't change the heart through legislation. They would say you've got to do that through religion and education. Well, there's some truth in this, but that does not make legislation less important. It may be true that you can't legislate integration, but you can legislate desegregation. It may be true that morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. It may be true that the law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. The law cannot make a man love me, but it can restrain him from lynching me, and I think that's pretty important also. And so while the law may not change the hearts of men, it does change the habits of men. So it is necessary for the church to support strong, meaningful civil rights legislation. Protestants, Catholics, and Jews stood in Selma, and in a beautiful, meaningful way, that was the ecumenical movement which created the Voting Rights Bill. That bill is a tribute to persons like James Reeb, Mrs. Viola Liuzza, and Jimmy Lee Jackson, those who died and suffered to make it possible. A second myth that we must deal with is that of exaggerated progress. Certainly we have made progress in race relations, and I think we can all glory that things are better today than they were 10 years ago. We should be proud of the steps we've made to rid our nation of this great evil of racial segregation and discrimination. On the other hand, we must realize that the plant of freedom is only a bud and not yet a flower. The Negro is freer in 1966, but he is not yet free. The Negro knows more dignity today than he has known in any period of his history in this country, but he is not yet equal. There still are stubborn, difficult problems to deal with. These are stubborn and difficult problems, and yet they are problems that must be tackled, for I need not remind you of the dangers inherent therein. There is nothing more dangerous than to build a society with a large segment of individuals who feel that they have no stake in it, who feel that they have nothing to lose. These are the people who will riot. In the areas of housing, schooling, and employment, there is still a great deal that must be done. I've heard it said that the day of demonstrations is over. Well, I'm sorry to say that I can't agree with that. As long as these problems are with us, it will be necessary to demonstrate in order to call attention to them. I'm not saying that demonstration is going to solve these problems. It's going to take something much more than demonstration, but at least the demonstration creates a kind of constructive crisis that causes a community to see the problem and causes a community to begin moving towards the point of action. The church must support this kind of demonstration. People talk about the long, hot summer that's ahead. I don't think we have to have a long, hot, violent summer. I certainly don't want to see it because I hate violence and I don't think it solves any problems. I think we can offset the long, hot, violent summer with a long, hot, nonviolent summer. People are huddled in ghettos, living in the most crowded and depressing conditions. They need some outlet, some way to express their legitimate discontent. What is a better way than to provide nonviolent channels through which they can do it? If this isn't provided, they are going to find it through more irrational, misguided means. So the nonviolent movement has a job to do in providing the nonviolent channels through which people can express their discontent and frustration. Now let me say that I'm still convinced that nonviolence is the most potential weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom and human dignity. And I'd like to say just a word about the philosophy, since it has been the underlying philosophy of our movement. It has power because it has a way of disarming the opponent. It exposes his moral defenses. It weakens his morale. And it works on his heart and conscience. And he just doesn't know what to do. If he doesn't hit you, wonderful. If he hit you, you develop the quiet courage of accepting blows without retaliating. If he doesn't put you in jail, that's very nice. But if he puts you in jail, you go in that jail and transform it from a dungeon of shame into a haven of freedom and human dignity. Even if he tries to kill you, you develop the inner conviction that there are some things so precious, something so eternally true, that they are worth dying for. If a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit for living. Since we are working toward a just society in this movement, we should use just methods to get there. Since we are working for a nonviolent society, we must use nonviolent means. Since we are working for an integrated society, we must work on an integrated basis for our staff and our civil rights organizations so that we don't get to racial justice and integration through the means of Black nationalism. Most revolutions in the past have been based on hope and hate, with the rising expectations of the revolutionaries implemented by hate for the perpetrators of the unjust system in the old order. I think the different thing about our revolution is that it has maintained hope and at the same time added love. Many people would disagree with me and say that love hasn't been there. I think we must stop and talk about what we mean in this context, because I would be the first to say that it is nonsense to urge oppressed people to love their violent oppressors in an affectionate sense. And I'm certainly not talking about that when I talk about the love standing at the center of our struggle. I think it is necessary to see the meaning of love in higher terms. The Greek language has 3 words for love: eros, phileo, and another is the word agape. I'm thinking not of eros or of friendship as expressed in phileo, but of agape, which is understanding, creative redemption, goodwill for all men, and overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. When one rises to love of this level, he loves a person who does the evil deed while hating the deed. I believe that in our best moments in this struggle, we have tried to adhere to this. In some strange way, we have been able to stand up in the face of our most violent opponents and say, in substance, we will match your capacity to inflict suffering with our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with our soul force. Do to us what you will, and we will still love you. We cannot, in good conscience, obey your unjust laws, because non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as cooperation with good. Throw us in jail and we will still love you. Threaten our children, bomb our homes, send your hooded perpetrators, and as difficult as it is, we will still love you. Send your propaganda agents around the nation and make it appear we are not fit morally, culturally, or otherwise for integration, and we will still love you. But be assured that we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. That one day we will win our freedom. We will not only win freedom for ourselves, we will so appeal to you, to your heart and your conscience, that we will win you in the process, and our victory will be a double victory. This is our message in the nonviolent movement. I think it is a powerful method, and I still believe in it. I know that it will lead us into the new day, not a day when we will seek to rise from a position of disadvantage to one of advantage, thereby subverting justice. Not a day when we will substitute one tyranny for another. We know that a doctrine of Black supremacy is as evil as a doctrine of white supremacy. We know that God is not interested merely in the freedom of Black men and brown men and yellow men, but God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race. He is interested in the creation of a society where all men will live together as brothers and every man will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Modern psychology has a word that has become common, maladjusted, but I must say to you there are some things in our world to which I'm proud to be maladjusted. And I call upon you and all people of goodwill to be maladjusted to these things until the good society is realized. I never intend to adjust myself to segregation and discrimination. I never intend to become adjusted to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few and leave millions of people perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of prosperity. I must honestly say, however much criticism it brings, that I never intend to adjust myself to the madness of militarism and to the self-defeating effects of physical violence. In a day when Sputniks and Geminis are dashing through outer space and ballistic missiles are carving highways of death through the stratosphere, no nation can win a war. It is no longer a choice between nonviolence and violence. It is now a choice between nonviolence and non-existence. I must confess that I believe firmly that our world is in dire need of a new organization, the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment, men and women as maladjusted as a prophet Amos, who, in the midst of the injustices of his day, cried out in words that echo across the centuries, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. As maladjusted as Abraham Lincoln, who had the vision to see that this nation could not survive half slave and half free. As maladjusted as Thomas Jefferson, who in the midst of an age amazingly adjusted to slavery, cried in words lifted to cosmic proportions, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As maladjusted as Jesus of Nazareth, who could say to the men and women of his day, he who lives by the sword will perish by the sword? Through such maladjustment, we will be able to emerge from the bleak and desolate midnight of man's inhumanity to man into the bright and glittering daybreak of freedom and justice. Let me say in conclusion that I have not despaired of the future. I believe firmly that we can solve this problem. Our goal for America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with America's. Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored here without wages. They made cotton king. They built the homes of their masters in the midst of the most oppressive and humiliating conditions. And yet, out of a bottomless vitality, they continue to grow and develop. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery couldn't stop us, the opposition that we now face will surely fail. We're going to win our freedom because both the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of the Almighty God are embodied in our echoing demands. And we can sing, we shall overcome, because somehow we know the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. We will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood and speed up that day when all God's children all over our nation and the world will be able to walk the earth as brothers and sisters. And then we can sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty we are free at last. Thank you.
Unitarian Universalism is a grand vision of a world filled with peace and justice, love and joy. That vision is embodied in a few large congregations, numerous mid-sized congregations, and many, many small congregations. No matter its size, every congregation depends on each of its members. Each one of you, by your commitment of time, energy, and resources, helps make that grand vision real. Individually and together, we are Unitarian Universalists, building a world filled with peace and justice, love and joy. Yes, stand up.
Sure. Okay. For our closing hymn, we'll be singing hymn number 169, We Shall Overcome. Please rise in mind, body, or spirit and join us in singing.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We shall always free. We shall always free. We shall always free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall always free someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall live in peace someday.
Our caring listener this week is Debbie Longenbacher. You can speak with her after the service if you have any concerns or would simply like someone to talk to. And trust that what you share is confidential. Please join hands if you wish. Some of you already are. The dream of justice and equality, the beloved community, is a dream worth living, worth giving our all. Let us continue to move forward, hand in hand, heart to heart, ever faithful, ever committed, ever courageous. May we honor Dr. King not only in our words, but in our deeds. Together, we carry his vision forward, bending the arc toward justice and creating a world filled with compassion and hope. We now extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. That's okay, thank you. She was trapped behind the hands. These things we carry in our hearts wherever we may go. Amen, shalom, salam, namaste, and blessed be. And now we will sing Go Now in Peace as a round. Thank you. And now please join us for our social